Hey there, welcome back to Geeky Greenhouse. Today we're going to go over some of the pros and cons of both in-ground gardening and container gardening.
So we thought it would be fun to sort of discuss the pros and cons of in-ground growing and container growing, because I've sort of started to lean towards in-ground growing, and I think Crystalline is sort of going the other way and really enjoys growing in containers.
So we're going to discuss some of our favorite things about growing in each. One of my favorite things about growing veggies and herbs and plants in containers is that you can move those plants anywhere that you want in your yard. If you notice a plant is getting too much sun, you can easily move it into the shade. If you notice it's not getting enough sun, you can easily move it into a sunnier spot. And we also had some nights where the temperatures really dropped down very low for this time of year, and we were able to move our plants inside, which was great because they were protected from the cold.
Yeah, portability is definitely a pro of container gardening. Just makes it a lot simpler. You don't have to cover the plants. You can just sort of bring them indoors when it's going to be cold, get them back outside. Easily extend the season on both ends.
Even in the middle of summer last year, we had a few days where it was super windy, and it was really nice to be able to move those plants closer to the house just to prevent them from getting damaged.
Yeah. Okay, so one of my favorite things about in-ground growing is that you can nurture and improve the soil over time. So you're dealing with real soil in the ground, mineral-based, like rock-based soil, so you can amend that with compost and allow those microbes and that biodiversity to infiltrate the soil and sort of improve it over time, you know?
Yeah, and we do reuse our soil from year to year. So when we're growing in containers, we empty that soil out, we sift through it, and then we amend it with compost. So it's definitely still good soil.
But it's not the same, you know, like container soil is peat-based for the most part, sometimes coir. You're not really dealing with that mineral-based soil. And there's just more maintenance as a result. You have to amend with all-purpose fertilizer. You can use compost, but I don't think you get the same biodiversity in containers as you do in ground.
Yeah. Well, for people that live in an area that may not have great soil, it's really nice to be able to grow in containers and have complete control over that soil, so you can make sure that your plants have the optimal growing conditions and make sure they're going to thrive.
Right, not everybody has in-ground soil to even grow in, so obviously that would make container gardening your only choice, but if you do have the choice between the two, it's good to know the differences. And that sort of brings me to my next point, which is it's much cheaper to get into in-ground growing if that's an option to you. You know, if you have a lawn and it's just grass right now and you're mowing it every week or two, why not transform part of that into a garden bed? It's basically free. You just have to get rid of the grass and start amending that soil to improve it, and you can get planting right away for very little money. Imagine covering the same area, maybe a 25 by 25 foot bed with containers. It's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to kind of look weird too.
Yeah, definitely. But that being said, you can certainly find containers on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace secondhand. People are always looking to give them away because they do take up a lot of space. So you can find these materials for less money.
That's true. Definitely good to reuse other people's waste. You know, if you can help it, you don't. Why bring more plastic into the world if you can just use someone else's, right? So.
Another great benefit of growing in containers is where you can grow. So not everybody has a yard that they can do in-ground growing, and I love being able to take advantage of our front steps, of the back deck, and any areas we can. So we can grow plants in containers anywhere we want there. It's also great for people that may have mobility issues. You know, if you have a lot of difficulty bending down, then you can put your container plants more elevated, and that makes them easier to access.
One thing you don't get from containers that you do get in ground is really deep soil. So essentially your plants can grow as deep as they naturally will. You're not constrained to a container, so that usually leads to a more resilient plant that can access water easier in drought situations and nutrients as well. So that'll often lead to better yield and better just overall resiliency.
If you're growing in grow bags specifically though, you do have the benefit of air pruning. So the oxygen is easily accessing the roots, and that also results in a healthier root system.
True. Yeah, I do like that about grow bags. They always seem to grow healthy plants, and you can probably credit that to the air pruning factor.
I also feel like growing in containers and grow bags that you have more control over pest management. So we are growing kale in grow bags right now, and we were able to elevate them to keep them away from the bunnies and chipmunks. So they're not completely ravaged at this point.
Yeah, we've had some devastating things happen in the garden before, especially in ground. You know, the bunnies can just hop right in and feast on your young peppers or whatever you have growing, especially early in the season. So that does make sense. By elevating just a foot or so, you do get that sort of barrier.
So let's talk about weeding. One of the biggest advantages of growing in containers is that you don't have to weed as frequently. And that being said, weeds do grow in the containers, but they're a lot easier to see. If you're direct sowing into the ground and you already have weeds coming up faster than the plant itself, it can be really difficult to weed around the plants or see what's going on. So container gardening, less of an issue.
Definitely. Of course, you can combat that in ground with a nice thick layer of mulch, but with smaller seedlings, like you said, if you're direct sowing some things in an area with really heavy weeds, it can be really difficult to differentiate between your crop and the weeds. So my biggest gripe with container gardening is watering. You have to water so frequently, especially in the hot summer months. You're watering every day usually, and if you miss a watering, it might become hydrophobic and it becomes even more difficult to water your plants. That never happens with in-ground growing. You know, you water deeply and infrequently, encourage those roots to grow super deep into the ground, and then they're accessing that water from really deep underground. You don't have to water nearly as much.
Yeah, and there are some things you can do to help remedy that. You know, you can mulch your container plants or make some sort of self-watering system if you're going to be away, but that definitely is one of the problems with growing in containers, and especially grow bags.
Right, there are some workarounds, you know, but they're a little clunky. If you want to put an irrigation system on your container garden, it's just going to be obvious, it's going to be visible, whereas in ground, you just don't have to worry about it as much.
So I definitely think you can grow a bigger variety of plants when you're growing in containers. For example, here in Zone 6, we cannot grow citrus trees outside, but we can grow them in pots and then bring them in for the winter. So it's kind of a benefit of growing in containers. You can grow a bigger variety of plants, things that you normally wouldn't be able to.
And I'll also just add another benefit there. You can grow plants indoors, of course. In containers, you can't really grow indoors and in the ground. That doesn't make any sense. So yeah, again, that mobility of being able to bring the plants wherever they need to be helps a lot.
Yeah, the weather is only getting more and more unpredictable, so being able to move the plants probably is the biggest benefit. With that being said, let's talk about some of the things that grow better in containers and some of the things that grow better in the ground. In our experience, anyway.
So I think for in-ground planting, anything that grows a large fruit or a really big plant is definitely better in ground. So for example, big tomato varieties, squashes, even cucumbers, melons, those are a lot easier. You can just direct sow a lot of them in the ground soil, and they'll have plenty of nutrients and water to produce those larger fruits. Another group of plants that make more sense in ground are perennials, which come back every year. If they're hardy to your zone, then of course it makes a lot more sense to just plant them in the ground outside. You can grow some hardy perennials in containers. Maybe you have like a big decorative pot and you want to grow some roses in it or something like that. That you can certainly do, but it usually makes more sense to just get them established in your native soil. And one last group of plants that make more sense, I think, in ground or maybe in raised beds are root veggies, so carrots and beets. You know, you can just direct sow them on the soil and get them into that nice deep natural soil setting.
Now, there are definitely some plants that are better for containers. How would you feel if I went out and planted a ton of mint in the yard?
Right.
Yeah. So invasive plants like mint are better grown in containers, and other herbs like oregano and thyme also work really well for containers. And we like to grow annuals like flowers in decorative containers as well, and any ornamental varieties, so even ornamental pepper varieties are smaller and they do really well in pots. Also, any warm season veggies like peppers and tomatoes do really well in containers because you can move them inside and protect them against the cold. So let us know in the comments what you prefer. Do you prefer growing in the ground or do you prefer growing in containers? And let us know what plants you plant where.
So those are our thoughts. We're not really as divided as it might seem in this video. We both like growing in both methods, so each method really has its own place. Thanks for watching Geeky Greenhouse, and we'll see you next time.